He told me, "You ruined our lives, but I own the deed, the recordings, and now I own my silence too." My son's voice didn't break my heart when he told me to get out. It was the fact that I'd sold everything to move in, and he didn't even flinch. The words echoed through my memory like the clang of an old church bell, sharp, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. There was no grief in his voice, only the bitter flatness of inconvenience. He didn't shout, not that first day. He didn't need to. Disappointment carries louder than fury, and Derek had always known how to wound with restraint. Years ago, he'd promised me, "You'll be part of everything." I remember that line because I repeated it to myself like a lullaby while boxing up my old life. The garden I tended after his father passed, the swing I never took down even after the grandkids outgrew it, the yellow walls in the hallway we painted together when he was 10, they were all gone now. Traded for a boxy guest room that didn't smell like home, didn't feel like family, and didn't welcome me as anything more than temporary. The room was once an office, converted without affection. Beige carpet flattened from years of wheeled chairs, a window barely larger than a serving tray, veiled with a thin, drooping blind. The only thing that greeted me was the smell of detergent, generic store-brand detergent, and a pillow that felt more like insulation than comfort. My suitcase stood upright beside the wall, unzipped but untouched. I hadn't even had time to unpack when Derek stood in the doorway, jaw tight, arms crossed. "You just moved in, and already you're ruining everything," he said, his voice bouncing off the hallway like it was too big for the space between us. I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy I once held against my chest after night terrors had grown into a man who couldn't disguise his resentment. He continued without waiting for a reply. "My son doesn't even have his own room anymore, Mom. You know that, right? You see how that's a problem?" I opened my mouth, but the words, like dust, stuck to the back of my throat. What could I say? That I gave up everything so he could have this? That I cashed in the last of my husband's pension and sold the only home I had ever known, just to put a down payment on this suburban dream? That I told myself it was worth it because I would be with them, near them, loved by them. But all that stayed in my chest. Instead, I nodded and said, "I'll stay out of the way. I'll make it work." He scoffed and walked away before I finished the sentence. That moment, that breath between my offer and his exit, settled into the pit of my stomach like lead. The first night was the worst. I lay on the stiff mattress staring at the ceiling fan as it buzzed and groaned overhead. The blades clicked faintly, uneven in their rotation. I could hear the baby, my youngest grandson, whimpering down the hall. Not wailing, just those soft, tired sounds babies make when they need a warm body. No one went to him. I thought about getting up, but I remembered Lena's rule about boundaries. "The kids have a routine," she'd said flatly over dinner. "Please don't interfere." So I didn't. The house creaked in the way unfamiliar houses always do. I heard the sound of the refrigerator clicking on, a bathroom door closing, the dryer tumbling something soft and heavy, towels maybe. My room had no clock, and I didn't dare check my phone. Time had become irrelevant. All I needed to know was that everyone was asleep but me. I stayed up writing in the little notebook I kept in my purse. It had originally been for jotting down blood pressure readings, grocery items, and the occasional birthday reminder. But that night, it became something else. "Day 1, I wrote. "My name is Nora Whitmore. I sold my home to help my son, and today I was told I'm the reason their child has no room." I underlined the word reason, not cause, not mistake. Reason, as if I were a problem they couldn't wait to solve. By morning, the house had resumed its rhythm. Lena passed me in the hallway on the way to the kitchen. She didn't make eye contact, just said, "Coffee's on." I found a mug, the only one not mismatched, and poured what was left in the carafe. It was lukewarm and bitter. Probably from the night before. She poured herself a fresh cup from the Keurig and added a splash of almond milk. Their backyard was neatly manicured, a square of green enclosed by a white vinyl fence. My grandson sat in the grass using a plastic bucket to collect leaves and dirt. No toys, just earth. He looked up and saw me through the glass. He waved. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. At lunchtime, Lena suggested I use the downstairs bathroom from now on. "Just easier with the kids running around," she said, then disappeared into the pantry. Later that day, I was reminded not to load the dishwasher unless I asked first. Something about the settings being complicated. At dinner, there were only 4 plates on the table. I took mine from the cabinet and sat down with my reheated bowl of soup after everyone else had finished. They didn't say it, but they didn't need to. I was not family. I was a wrinkle in the wallpaper, a stray thread in their tightly woven fabric. Later that week, I found my slippers kicked beneath the bed and my suitcase shoved into the closet. I hadn't done it. I hadn't touched it since the day I arrived. That's when I knew. They didn't even want the reminder of what I'd given up to be there. My belongings, my history, my presence. It was all an eyesore. Still, I tried. I folded towels no one asked me to fold. I swept crumbs I hadn't dropped. I cleared plates I didn't eat from. At night, I sat at the kitchen table long after they'd gone to bed, pretending to read the local paper, pretending not to notice the way the family tiptoed around my existence. One evening, Derek passed me without a word. The mail was in his hand, and he paused only to say, "You forgot to forward some of this." I looked at the envelope. It was from my former utilities provider. I hadn't forgotten. I'd canceled every service. He dropped it on the table like a verdict and left me alone again. A few days later, Lena pulled me aside while the kids were watching cartoons. "We're thinking of repainting the guest room. Something lighter, brighter. Would you be okay moving some of your things back into storage for a bit?" I nodded. Of course I did. What else could I do? Tell her I'd already stored away more than just clothes? That I'd buried pieces of my old life in cardboard boxes and sold furniture I once swore I'd die owning? That night, I sat in the armchair by the window, the only chair in the house that didn't face a television. I ran my fingers along the edge of my notebook. The pages were soft from wear. I added a new entry. Day 7. I am an echo. I take up space, but they pretend not to hear me. I wrote those words and stared at them until the ink blurred. Then I closed the notebook and tucked it into my coat pocket. Later, I heard them whispering in their bedroom. The door wasn't fully shut. Lena's voice, sharp but hushed, floated through the hallway. "How long do you think she's got left?" A pause. "A year? 2? She's already done enough damage." The door closed and the silence returned. Only this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt deliberate, like a lid on a pot, like a final decision. I didn't cry. My tears had dried up years ago, around the time I had to choose between paying the property taxes or refilling my arthritis prescription. What I felt wasn't sadness. It was something colder, something heavier. The slow formation of a truth I hadn't wanted to admit. They weren't just tired. They weren't just stressed. They didn't love me. They tolerated me. And tolerance, I've learned, is the softest kind of cruelty. It lets you believe you belong until you try to speak. I climbed into bed and pulled the blanket over my knees. The mattress creaked, and I let it. I no longer cared if I woke anyone. I thought about Derek's voice that day in the hallway. I thought about the lines around his eyes. Not from worry for me, but from trying to hold back everything he wanted to say. He didn't expect me to live this long. He didn't want me to. I rested one hand on my phone and the other on my notebook. Tomorrow, I'd do what I always did. Pour coffee, smile at the grandkids, fold laundry no one asked for. But tonight, I let the truth settle in my bones, like the ache of weather coming in. And I wrote, one last time before the light flicked off. I wrote in my notebook, Day 1. I sold my house to buy theirs, and today I was told I ruined their lives. When the banker asked if I had submitted a home equity loan for $215,000, I knew something was terribly wrong because I'd barely used a credit card in 5 years. It was a crisp Thursday morning when the call came. I was folding towels in the laundry room, warm cotton in my hands, the hum of the dryer low and steady behind me. I hadn't been asked to fold them. That had become my routine now, do things no one noticed to remind myself that I was still useful, still human. The phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I had trained myself not to pick up unknown numbers, but something about this one, an old instinct maybe, urged me to swipe. I brought it to my ear and said, "Hello?" A woman's voice, brisk but pleasant, introduced herself. "Mrs. Nora Whitmore," I said, speaking. "This is Marla from First Citizens Credit Union. I'm just calling to confirm your application for a home equity loan submitted last week. We're only missing your most recent tax return and proof of residency before we can proceed." I stood completely still. A towel halfway folded hung limply in my hands. I repeated her words to myself silently, home equity loan, trying to make them make sense. I hadn't submitted anything. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't touched anything related to a bank in months, aside from depositing a $10 birthday check from a friend back home. "I didn't apply for any loan," I said. Marla paused. Her tone shifted slightly, cautious now. "Well, ma'am, I have your name, social security number, and address all here on the documents. You did sign the initial authorization digitally on January 15th, correct?" My mouth went dry. "No, I didn't sign anything. I don't even know how to sign things digitally." The silence that followed was thicker than any pause on the line should have been. "Would you mind confirming the last 4 digits of your social?" she asked. I gave them. Another pause. Then she said, "I think it would be a good idea if you came in to speak with someone directly." By noon, I was sitting across from her in a glass-walled office in the corner of the bank. The fluorescent lighting washed everything in a pale, sterile blue. I wore the same cardigan I'd worn for 3 days, soft lavender, pills on the sleeve, and my sensible shoes. I felt like a ghost inside their sleek new building. Marla printed out the documents. She pushed them toward me, 1 page at a time, like she wasn't sure how much I could take in all at once. There it was, my full name, our address on Wyndham Circle, my date of birth, and a signature scrawled across the bottom of the loan request. My name, but not my hand. The P in Whitmore was wrong. It curved upward like a balloon string instead of looping down as mine always had. The slant was slightly off, too. Even my shakier days had more control than that. And whoever signed it had placed a period after my middle initial. I hadn't used that in 40 years. "This isn't mine," I said quietly. Marla gave me a look. Soft, sympathetic. "We've seen this before, sometimes within families." She kept her tone neutral, like a waitress delivering bad news about a kitchen delay. I walked out of the bank with a folder full of copies tucked under my arm, my hand steady despite the cold. Not from fear, from something else. Certainty. I knew who had done this, and I knew what I had to do. The house looked the same when I returned. Familiar, plain, pretending to be normal. Inside, the light in the kitchen flickered as always. My grandson sat in front of the television, his little fingers smudging the tablet screen as some cartoon warbled in the background. Lena was reheating something in a pan, chicken maybe. The smell was flat and oily. Dinner passed with the usual stiffness. Derek arrived late, already irritated. His tie was undone, and his shirt clung to him like he'd run through rain. Lena filled his plate in silence. My place at the table, as always, had no napkin. Halfway through the meal, I reached into my bag and placed the folded papers in the center of the table. "What's this?" Derek asked, not even glancing up. "You tell me," I replied. His fork paused. He picked up the top page, scanned it. His eyes flicked down the text, then over to the bottom where the signature sat like a fingerprint left at a crime scene. "I got a call from the bank," I said. Apparently I applied for a home equity loan. Derek's expression didn't change. That worried me more than if he'd shouted. He placed the paper back down. Lena had stopped chewing. I wonder, I said, keeping my tone calm, who would have had access to my social security number, my ID, my trust? Don't do this, Derek said. Don't start. Start what? This performance. His voice rose half a step. Lena placed her spoon down slowly, her nails clicking against the ceramic. You live here, he snapped. It's your house. You're part of this family. Part of this family? I repeated, not even hiding the irony in my voice. He glared at me across the table. Don't turn this into some martyr act, Mom. We're struggling. You know that. So you forged my name? It's not like that, he growled. We needed help. You said you were helping. Help doesn't come with a forged signature. Lena stood, her chair scraping loudly. Let's not do this in front of the kids. Derek slammed his hand on the table and the silverware jumped. You don't understand what it's like. We're drowning here. Lena's job is unstable, my credit's trashed, and you— I said nothing. You just sit here folding towels and judging us. I blinked slowly. Everything was fine until you moved in, he said, and the words cracked out of him like lightning splitting an old tree. You ruined our lives. Get out. I stood up, not fast, but firm. Lena reached for Derek's arm. Mark, stop, she whispered. But he shook her off. If the only thing you have left to offer is a loan you won't even sign, then maybe it'd be better if you just— His voice caught, but not long enough to stop him. Just died already. It was like the air left the room. The boy sat still on the couch, blinking at the silence. Even he seemed to know something awful had happened. I reached into my pocket, clicked the small button on the recorder. The red light went dark. What's that? Derek asked, his tone suddenly small. I tucked it back into my sweater. Proof. You recorded me? His voice trembled now, unsure which emotion to settle on. Yes. Why? Because I'm not stupid. And this time, I need the world to believe me. Lena backed away like I'd struck her. Her face was pale, mouth slightly open. Derek said nothing. I'll go, I said. Tonight, if you want. Good, Derek hissed. Pack your things. But I smiled. Not with joy, not with bitterness. With clarity. Because I finally knew I wasn't the one who had failed this family. They had failed me. And now they were going to see what happens when a woman they thought was powerless stops protecting them. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the recorder resting on my lap, its blinking light off now, but not forgotten. I stared at my folded sweaters and worn slippers, the plastic bag of medication labeled with my name in permanent marker. I hadn't brought much, but even that was too much for them. They had built a home on my back. Now they would learn what it meant to stand without it. I wrote a new entry in my notebook. Not neat this time, no careful script. I looked into my son's face and realized he wasn't ashamed. He was scared I'd fight back. He told me, "You should have just died already." I didn't flinch. I pressed stop on the recorder in my pocket. Those words didn't rattle me like they once might have. Not because they didn't hurt. They did, deeply, but because something inside me had already calcified. There comes a moment when grief finishes hardening into something else. Mine had turned to steel. After that dinner, they didn't say much to me. Derek avoided me outright, his footsteps creaking over floorboards with sharp turns and tight door slams. Lena maintained a brittle politeness, her smile a slash of white over gritted teeth. But the house had changed. The atmosphere had changed. Or maybe it was me. The next morning, I walked 3 blocks through the misty cold to the corner CVS. I didn't wear gloves, though the wind bit at my knuckles. I wanted to feel the sting. I needed to remember this, every part of it. The clerk barely looked up when I placed the black Sony recorder on the counter beside a pack of spearmint gum and a bottle of Tylenol. "Gift receipt?" she asked. "No," I said. "This one's for me." I spent the rest of the day in silence, moving around the house like I was tracing its bones. I watched Lena shush the children when I entered the room, watched her glance at the door behind me like I might vanish if she waited long enough. Derek stayed gone longer each day, coming home with fast food wrappers in his hands and the stench of hopelessness in his eyes. I started keeping a log. Morning. Lena tells the kids not to talk to me because Grandma's grumpy and tired. Afternoon. Derek slams the door after a phone call. Useless old woman, he mutters. Evening. They order takeout. No one knocks on my door. I didn't log these things for a court. I wasn't preparing a case. I was preparing the truth for myself. So I could never be gaslit into forgetting what I had seen and heard. On the fourth day after the confrontation, I sat in the dining room with an old issue of Good Housekeeping rescued from the recycling bin. The sunlight was hitting the kitchen tile at an angle that reminded me of Sunday mornings in my old home, where I used to bake bread and play Glenn Miller on vinyl. I was holding that thought when Derek entered, phone pressed to his ear. No, he snapped, pacing. Use her name again. She doesn't check her credit. She barely knows how to use the internet. Just use the same signature. It worked last time. He walked right past me. Didn't even register my presence. I didn't breathe. Didn't blink. My hand hovered near my knitting bag, where the small recorder blinked softly, tucked just beneath a ball of unused yarn. When he left, I waited 5 full minutes before exhaling. Then I pressed stop. That night, I played the recording back 3 times, once for the content, once for the tone, and once just to let myself feel what it meant. The boy I once sang to sleep had become a man who now used my identity, like a stolen library card. I had held his hand through chickenpox, sat in emergency rooms when he broke his wrist, held a bowl for him when he got food poisoning at prom. I had bandaged his knees, and now I was collecting audio clips of his betrayal. The world tilts like that sometimes, subtly, sharply, then forever. The next morning, I retrieved the manila folder from the bottom of my suitcase. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my room and spread its contents like a quilt. The documents were familiar, a map of my married life. Our deed, our title, tax records, insurance forms, yellowed, slightly curled at the edges, but legible. And then there it was. Owner of record, Nora M. Whitmore. No co-signer, no amendment, no joint filing. The house they lived in, the house I had funded, the house they tried to steal was still mine. Not sentimentally, not spiritually, legally. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, the familiar ache in my knees momentarily forgotten. I had postponed signing the deed transfer months ago when Lena suggested it would make things simpler for taxes and insurance. We never followed through. They assumed I had. They counted on it. They'd built a scheme on a document I had never touched, and I was so deeply, painfully glad that I hadn't. That evening, while Derek and Lena bickered in the driveway about who forgot the milk, I made a phone call. The sun was setting, casting long, cold stripes of light across the guest room floor. "Thomas Hargrove's office," a woman said on the line. "How may I help you?" "This is Nora Whitmore," I said. "Tom handled my husband's estate years ago. I need to speak with him." "One moment." A click, then a familiar voice, slightly older but still steady. "Nora," Tom said. "Good Lord. It's been a while." "Too long," I replied. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. He had been kind and thorough after George passed, helping me wade through paperwork and probate and letters I hadn't known what to do with. I had sent him a Christmas card every year since. "How can I help?" "I need to discuss a property," I said. "Mine. It's complicated." "I'm listening." So I told him, slowly, carefully, about selling my home to help my son, about the mortgage in my name, about the promise to transfer the deed, and the fact that it never happened, about the bank call, the forged documents, the silence in my own house. Tom listened without interruption. Then he said something that hung in the room like a lit candle. "You're not the first mother I've heard this from, Nora, but you might be the first one doing something about it." He said he'd be in town that Friday. He'd stop by with a notary. After we hung up, I sat for a long time with the phone still in my lap. Something in me shifted, not rage, not even grief, something older, something like resolve. They had thought I was too old to notice, too tired to track details, too soft to hold a boundary. They forgot I was once the woman who worked 2 jobs and still made dinner at 6, the woman who taught their son to walk without falling. Now I would teach them how to fall without seeing it coming. Over the next few days, I took careful, deliberate steps. I went back to the credit union, this time downtown, a branch no one in the family used. I opened a new checking account under my maiden name, Nora Manning. It was like putting on an old coat and realizing it still fit. I deposited a portion of my retirement savings, quietly, cleanly. I rented a small storage unit 2 towns over, $38 a month. I called it my quiet place. Each day I removed something small from the house, George's cufflinks, the locket from my mother, a pie dish I'd used for every holiday cobbler since 1974. I wrapped them in dish towels and tucked them into a tote bag that looked like I was heading to the library. Sarah thought she was slowly erasing me from the house, but I was already gone. On the 7th night, I sat on the floor with my back against the closet wall and played one more clip. Sarah's voice, high and clipped. She just takes up space. What does she even do all day? Breathe and judge us? Derek laughed. Trust me, the moment she's gone, everything will run smoothly. Another silence followed, but not a thoughtful one, a comfortable one. They weren't even angry anymore. They were comfortable hating me. That's when I cried. Not because they'd hurt me, but because they had made it so easy to let go. This wasn't a tough transition. This wasn't stress. They didn't love me. They used me. They resented me. And now I had proof. The next morning, I passed Derek in the hallway. I smiled, not because I'd forgiven him, because I had decided something. If I was invisible, then they wouldn't see me coming. That night, under a dim lamp, I wrote in the margins of my notebook, "They wanted me invisible. Good, because they'll never see me coming." The soup was lukewarm, the silence hot. I placed the documents on the table like cutlery. Let them eat that. The days leading up to that dinner passed with a peculiar calm. They no longer pretended to include me. No one asked if I wanted coffee. The mail was sorted without comment. Derek left for work early and came home later than ever, his jaw perpetually clenched. Lena floated through the kitchen with a blankness I recognized, guilt woven too tightly to show emotion. She wasn't afraid of me, not yet, but she was beginning to notice that something in me had changed. Tom had visited that morning. He wore a soft gray blazer and carried a leather portfolio, the same one I remembered from years ago when he'd sat beside me after George died. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and his voice had a slower weight to it, but his handshake was still firm, and his instincts just as sharp. We sat together in the guest room, the room they used to call my space, and went over the documents, the deed, the title, my tax returns, the bank letters, the voice recordings on a small USB drive he slid into his laptop. After listening to Derek's words, the bitterness, the threats, Tom removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Well," he said, "you weren't exaggerating. I don't have a reason to anymore." We went over the cease and desist he'd filed with the lending company, the affidavit asserting my sole ownership. He even brought a new will, witnessed and notarized, that excluded both Derek and Lena from everything. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. "If anything happens to me," I said, "I want it known I didn't go quietly." "You've already made that clear," Tom replied. By 5 o'clock he was gone. By 6 I had set the dinner table. 4 bowls, 4 spoons, 1 envelope. The dining room was unusually still. The windows rattled softly from the wind outside, and the overhead light flickered once before steadying. Lena reheated the lentil stew from 2 nights before, scraping it from the container like she couldn't stand the sight of it anymore. Derek arrived just as she finished plating. He smelled faintly of stale cologne and stress. He kissed the top of his son's head and sat down without a word. I watched him glance at the envelope resting beside my bowl. He didn't ask what it was, not yet. Lena tried to lighten the air. "I made lentil stew," she said, lifting her spoon. It sounded like a peace offering, but no one accepted it. We ate in silence. The scraping of metal against ceramic, the occasional grunt from the toddler flipping through a picture book in his high chair. The TV in the other room was on, muted, casting flashes of color on the wall. Halfway through the meal, I pushed the envelope toward the center of the table. Derek's fork paused. "What's this?" I didn't answer right away. I waited until he reached for it. He pulled the papers free, his eyes flicking across the header, down the first page, and settling on the signature line. He recognized it before he finished reading. His jaw tightened. The corners of his mouth twitched. "That's the deed," I said. "To this house." He stared at me. "Yeah, I can read." "Then you'll see what name's on it." Lena stopped chewing. I leaned in slightly. "You remember how you told me it would be easier if we put it in your name? For insurance, for taxes. You said we'd do the paperwork after the move." No one answered. "I never signed anything." Lena shifted in her seat. "You told us you did." "I said I would," I corrected. "But we postponed. Then you forgot, or assumed, or hoped." The air in the room changed, like static before a storm. "I also filed a fraud report," I said, "with the credit union. The loan application you submitted using my information, that's already under review." Derek stood suddenly, knocking his chair back a few inches. "You think this is funny?" "I think it's sad." "You're not doing this. You're not blowing up our lives over a signature." "I'm not the one who forged it." Lena's hand trembled around her spoon. She placed it down gently like it might break. Derek's voice cracked into something sharp. "We're drowning here. We're behind on the mortgage. The credit cards are maxed out, and you sit here folding laundry and acting like you're better than us." "I sat here," I said calmly, "and listened for weeks." "You live here," he shouted. "This is your house. You're part of this family." "No," I said, "this is my house. And I stopped being part of this family the moment you decided to steal from me." He slammed his hand on the table. The bowls rattled. The baby flinched. "You don't understand what it's like," he said through gritted teeth. "We've been scraping by since the day you moved in. I didn't force you to buy this house. You wrote the check. You cashed it." His face twisted. I saw it. Guilt, yes, but something else too. Panic. "I wonder," I said, "if Lena's boss will feel comfortable keeping her on once the federal investigation begins. Fraud is a serious word." Lena stood up, her hands shaking. "We didn't mean for it to go this far." "But you let it." Derek's hands were fists now, gripping the back of his chair. "So what now, Mom? You want us to grovel? To pack up and leave?" I shook my head slowly. "I want you to feel what I felt every night I sat at this table without a place. Every morning I made coffee no one drank. Every moment I wondered if I was losing my mind or just finally seeing you clearly." Lena turned away. Derek's breathing was loud in the quiet. I slid one last paper across the table. "That's the fraud complaint, with the forged signature, with the date, and with the voice recordings." Derek didn't touch it. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said. "Yes," I said softly, "I do." The wind outside howled, rattling the back porch door. No one moved to close it. No one moved at all. The toddler dropped his spoon and it clattered against the tile. It echoed louder than anything else in that moment. Lena picked it up, but her hands were shaking too hard to place it back on the tray. I folded my napkin. "This is my home," I said, "and you are my guests. But not for long." Derek's eyes darted between the documents, his wife and me. I could see the gears spinning in his head, all the backup plans collapsing one by one. He wanted to scream. He wanted to throw something. But for the first time, he didn't. He whispered instead, low and venomous. "You wouldn't dare." I sipped my tea, steady and warm. "Watch me." Chapter 5. The Quiet Exit. Word count. 320. They didn't kick me out. They just made it impossible to stay. That was fine. I already had a moving truck scheduled for Wednesday. After the confrontation at dinner, the house didn't implode. It didn't erupt in chaos or apology. It just shifted. Like a tide pulling back from the shore, subtle but irreversible. They didn't argue with me again. They didn't ask questions or push for more. They simply went quiet, and the silence spoke volumes. I noticed little changes first. My toothbrush disappeared from the upstairs bathroom. When I asked Lena, she blinked and said, "Oh, I thought it was old. I threw it out." A few days later, my reading glasses vanished from the coffee table. I found them later under the couch, scratched. The blanket I used in the den was accidentally donated during a garage clean-out. My preferred cereal was replaced with a cheaper brand that gave me nausea, small erasures, made to look like coincidence. By the end of the week, I wasn't allowed in the kitchen anymore. "It's just easier if we streamline meal prep," Lena said, eyes glued to her phone. So I ate in my room, a plastic bowl of cereal with powdered milk and a spoon that bent slightly at the handle. I chewed in silence while the hum of the dishwasher filtered through the door. At night, I heard whispers from the master bedroom, angry, tired. One evening, the door creaked open slightly. I heard Lena say, "How long do you think she's got left? A year? 2? Then more softly, "She's already done enough damage." The door clicked shut. The next morning, I began packing. Not all at once, of course. That would have been too obvious, too satisfying. I moved through the house like a breeze no one noticed. Folded sweaters disappeared from the closet. Family heirlooms migrated from shelves into padded bags. Photographs vanished from frames. The first thing to go was George's cufflinks. I wrapped them in a worn flannel shirt and tucked them into the lining of my tote. Next came the locket, my mother's, passed down through 4 generations, hidden inside a coffee tin marked expired. The antique pie dish took some maneuvering. I pretended to wash it, then walked it straight out to the car. Every time I left the house, I carried something with me, one piece of my life at a time. I drove out to the storage unit just past the interstate. Unit number 19, a square metal door with a rusted handle and the faint smell of cedar inside. I arranged everything carefully. George's photo album, the notebooks filled with my handwriting, the USB drives, labeled and sealed in envelopes. There, in that quiet little room, my life began to take shape again. At home, I maintained the illusion. I smiled when Lena offered me cold soup. I nodded when Derek muttered his passive pleasantries. They thought I was retreating in defeat, but I was simply clearing the stage. On Tuesday afternoon, I called Silver Maple Movers. The man on the phone was named Jesse. He had a slow voice and a soft kind of authority. "We'll be there at 7 sharp, he said. "You sure you don't want us to ring the bell?" "No," I said. "Just knock once. I'll be waiting." Wednesday morning arrived crisp and quiet. Dew glistened on the grass like shattered glass. I woke at 5:30, dressed in a fresh blouse and pressed slacks, and sat in the armchair with my hands folded. At 6:58, a gentle knock came. Jesse and his crew moved with practiced grace, young men with tattoos and work boots and soft eyes that didn't ask questions. They handled my boxes with care, wrapping even the smallest items like they mattered. One of them whistled while carrying my framed photo of George. I liked him. By 8:15, the closet was empty. My suitcase was zipped and locked. The drawers no longer held spare socks or hair ties or notebooks filled with nights I couldn't forget, just bare wood and dust. I left the guest room exactly as I found it, impersonal and quiet. I didn't say goodbye. Not because I was angry, because I was done. They weren't home. Derek and Lena had left earlier for a financial meeting, no doubt scrambling to rearrange the crumbling puzzle they thought they could control. I didn't need them to see the finale. The kitchen was still. A half-empty coffee pot sat on the burner. Bills were piled near the fridge, unpaid. I placed a small wooden box in the center of the table. Inside it, I left the following: a printed copy of the deed listing me as sole owner, a formal withdrawal of my intent to transfer the title, a copy of the fraud report filed with the credit union, 2 USB drives, one labeled recordings, the other backup, a letter neatly typed and signed in blue ink: to whom it may concern. This house no longer belongs to you. It never did. I closed the lid and walked out the front door without a sound. The air outside felt different, lighter, not just because I was free, but because the weight they put on me had never truly been mine to carry. By noon, I was stepping into my new apartment. The senior residence was clean, modern, and warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The lobby smelled faintly of lavender and furniture polish. A smiling woman at the front desk handed me a welcome packet and a set of keys. "Welcome home, Mrs. Whitmore." And for the first time in years, I believed her. The apartment was small but perfect. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette with brushed nickel fixtures, a window that overlooked the river, where ducks drifted like thoughts too soft to disturb. I walked the perimeter slowly, touching the countertop, the bookshelf, the linen closet stocked with fresh towels. Everything had been arranged in advance: utilities, dining credit, monthly services, all prepaid. I had planned it that way. This time, everything had my name on it. The armchair by the window was plush and deep. I sat down, placed my hands in my lap, and closed my eyes for a long moment. Then I turned on my phone. 99 plus missed calls, all from Derek. No voicemails, just silence trying to crawl back into my life. I didn't answer. I didn't block him either. Some things are meant to be seen, to be felt. Let him stare at my name on that screen. Let his thumb hover over the call button again and again. Let the weight of being ignored settle into his gut the way his words once settled into mine, like stones. I looked around at the apartment. The clock on the wall ticked in even, gentle seconds. A stack of watercolor brochures sat on the small table near the entryway. Savannah, Portland, the Amalfi Coast. I reached for the one labeled Golden Miles Women Over 60 Travel Club and smiled. I hadn't just moved, I had arrived. She turns her phone on, 99 plus missed calls. She does not answer. You'd think when a son loses access to his mother, he'd feel grief. Derek just felt panic. I let him sit with that. The calls didn't stop after the first day. They multiplied. Like weeds through cracked pavement. Different numbers, some local, some blocked. The messages started pouring in. First urgent, then pleading, then pitiful. "We need to talk." I didn't mean for it to go that far. "I'm sorry, Mom." But it was never sorry for what he did. It was sorry that he lost control. Sorry that I didn't give him a chance to rewrite the ending. I waited. I didn't block the calls. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat on my new balcony with a blanket draped over my knees, a glass of cold water at my side, and the sound of distant church bells ringing somewhere over the river. My apartment faced west, and in the evenings the sun would dip just beyond the trees and set the water on fire. That light made me feel like the world hadn't closed, only turned a corner. One morning I opened my laptop and began writing. Not a letter, not a reply, a file. I called it, "If Anything Happens to Me." I attached the audio clip where Derek's voice, calm, tired, and clear, said, "If she'd just died already, we wouldn't have to deal with all this." Then I added one sentence beneath it. "You were once the child I loved most, but the man you've become, I don't recognize him." I hit send. Then I muted the thread. 2 days later, a voicemail arrived. Derek's voice cracked at the edges, like ice thawing in spring. "Mom, please, just tell me you're okay. I didn't mean what I said." We were stressed. I was scared. "I shouldn't have forged your name. I know that now." Silence. Then, more softly, "I didn't think you'd really leave." That was the problem, wasn't it? They never thought I would leave, because they never thought I could. To them, I was a fixture, a faucet that poured money, patience, and presence without ever drying up. They thought motherhood was endless. That love meant servitude, that my aging hands would always be there to carry what they refused to lift themselves. But I did leave. Not out of spite, out of survival. And Derek would have to learn that lesson without me. Spring came early that year. The cherry blossoms bloomed along the bike path behind the senior residence, and the staff organized watercolor classes every Tuesday. I signed up for all 6 sessions. My roses still looked like cabbages and my clouds resembled potatoes, but I laughed more than I had in years. Jean, my old friend from back home, sent a letter. Inside was a smaller envelope sealed with care. The note read, "Dearest Nora, Mark came by, said he wanted your address. I didn't give it to him, but I told him something else. Your mother is doing better than I've ever seen her. He looked like someone told him the sun would never rise again. Just thought you'd like to know. Love, Jean." I didn't laugh, I didn't cry, I simply sat with it. The knowledge that he had lost access to the one person who believed he could be better, and I no longer needed him to be. Every Wednesday, the Golden Miles group met in the lobby before boarding a charter bus. 10 of us, all women over 60, wide-brimmed hats and orthopedic shoes, clutching passports and guidebooks like teenagers on their first trip. We weren't delicate, we were fierce. We danced barefoot on balconies in Savannah. We whispered old secrets under cherry blossoms in Kyoto. We cried together at the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, not because we were sad women, but because we were alive women. On the cruise down the Danube, I met a man named Samuel. He was from Maine, a retired dentist with a polite smile and the kind of voice that made you lean in, widowed like me. His stories were simple, about fishing trips with his granddaughter and the way his late wife used to read him poetry at night. We sat beside each other for dinner one evening. I offered him the last dinner roll. He said, "Only if you'll take half." That's how it started. Not with sparks, not with grand declarations. Just with gentle consideration. We shared books, dessert, and the quiet understanding that not everything had to be dramatic to matter. When we returned, we didn't promise forever, just that we'd write, maybe travel again. That was enough. One night, back in my apartment, I pulled out my old notebook. I flipped past the earlier entries, folded towels, the missing blanket, the child's whimper through thin walls. I turned to a fresh page. "Day 1 of my new life," I wrote. "I am not a burden. I am not a fixture. I am not waiting to die. I am living, and I'm finally doing it for me." I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the city moved like it always had, unaware, uninterested. But I was not the same woman I had been. There's a citrus tree just outside my window. It blooms even in winter. The scent drifts up on warm days, sweet and sharp. Sometimes I sip my coffee and listen to the birds, bickering over crumbs. I marvel not at the silence, but at the absence of weight. That invisible weight I carried for decades. The guilt, the hesitation, the quiet ache of being needed and never thanked. I used to believe that motherhood meant erasing yourself, that the best mothers were the ones who held everyone else together, quietly, like glue. I don't believe that anymore. Now I believe in boundaries, in beginnings, in saying yes to things just because they bring joy. This year alone, I said yes to French lessons, a weekend trip to Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and baking with almond flour even though I still hate it. I've become the woman I wish my own mother had gotten to be, not because I'm lucky, because I stopped asking to be allowed. I didn't scream, I didn't shame, I didn't seek revenge. I simply took back what was mine, my name, my space, my peace, my kindness, and I placed it in the hands of the only person who had truly earned it, me. Some doors are best left closed, but some, when they finally swing open, feel like the sky itself walked in. There's a kind of quiet that only comes after a long storm, not the silence of emptiness, but the stillness of resolution. That's what I live in now. A peace I fought for, not with fists, not with shouting, but with clarity, patience, and the unshakable truth of who I am. I look back sometimes, not out of sorrow, but to remind myself just how far I've walked. The days I sat at their table, invisible. The nights I lay in a room they called mine, even as they plotted to take what I built. The way they smiled at me while cutting me out. It would have broken a different kind of woman, but not me. Not anymore. I remember folding their laundry with hands that once held my babies. I remember cooking their meals while they whispered about my worth behind closed doors. I remember each small insult disguised as a joke, each shrug, each dismissal. I remember it all, but I no longer carry it. I left those pieces behind like dead leaves on a branch, and in their place, I found new growth, my own. It wasn't revenge I sought. It was truth. And when the truth finally sat on that dinner table beside cold soup and colder glances, I saw them for what they truly were, not villains in some grand drama, but fragile people trying to patch their failures with borrowed strength. Mine. And when I took it back, they had nothing left to stand on. Some say justice roars. But mine came softly, like paper sliding across wood, like the click of a lock finally turned in my favor. My power wasn't in confrontation. It was in preparation, in remembering where I'd hidden the proof, in calling the right names, in no longer asking for kindness from those who only saw me as convenience. That's the kind of strength they never saw coming. I live alone now, not lonely, just alone. And there's beauty in that. My windows face the sunset. And in the evenings, I watch the lights stretch across the floor like a promise kept. I wake when I choose. I eat what I like. I answer only to myself. And in the quiet, I hear the voice of the woman I used to be, frightened, exhausted, aching to be seen, and I tell her, we made it. I keep reminders, small ones, a locket in the drawer, a voice recording tucked in a folder labeled for me. Not because I need evidence anymore, but because they remind me how far I've come, how hard I fought. How I rose one silent choice at a time, from erasure to presence. I am no longer someone's burden. I am not their backup plan. I am not their safety net or stepping stone. I am myself, fully, finally. They may still talk about me. Maybe they say I was cruel, that I turned my back, that I should have stayed silent, grateful, obedient. But they don't live with what I endured. And they will never know the strength it took to leave, not in anger, but in peace. I walk slower now, but my steps are steadier. I laugh more. I feel light. Sometimes that's the miracle, not starting over, but realizing you never needed their permission to begin again. My calendar is full of things I want. Book clubs, watercolor classes, road trips with women who call me by my first name, not mom or grandma or you. And sometimes, just sometimes, I say no. Without guilt, without a long explanation. Just no, because I can. People say aging is about loss. But I've gained more in the last year than I did in the decade before. Gained clarity, gained solitude, gained the confidence to be loud in small ways, ordering dessert, booking a solo trip, wearing colors that make me feel alive. I used to believe love meant sacrifice. Now I know real love doesn't ask you to disappear. It invites you to stand taller. I don't miss the house. I miss the memories it held before they poisoned them. but even those are mine again. Slowly reclaimed in quiet moments and old photos I kept hidden in my drawer. I don't regret giving them chances. I only regret how long I believed their apologies would change anything. Some people learn when they lose. Others simply look for new doors to knock on. Either way, I won't be opening mine. This story doesn't end with a confrontation or a courtroom. It ends with a woman, once silent, now certain, writing her own chapter. No audience, no applause, just a pen, a page, and a future that belongs solely to her. So if you've ever felt invisible, ever been taken for granted, ever been told you were just a mother, just a woman past her prime, hear this. You are never too old to take your life back, never too late to draw a line, never too far gone to begin again with grace, power, and truth. My philosophy remains: kindness is strength, but only when you guard it with wisdom. And if this story moved you, I invite you to like this video. It helps more people hear stories like ours. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear what happens next in another tale of quiet strength, righteous justice, and the kind of resilience only life can teach.